All right, it is time for a wrap up. Hey everyone, it is Shannon, and I'm super excited to be here today to share with you my monthly reading reflection and wrap up, or stats. This isn't really wrap up. I just said wrap up because I have a wrap up card. I should have a reflection card. I don't have one. I will make one. It goes on the list. Anyhow, so these tend to be longer videos, so I will timestamp them down below to the different sections that I sort of group the different things that I talk about. So these are those sections if you would like to know and jump to them down below, or you are of course welcome to watch the whole thing. So I will be starting off sharing about my stats, then I will take a look at series versus standalone reads, because I always find that fun. I'll do a quick project check-in, then I will reflect back on the month in terms of both my TBR and what my monthly goals are, if there were any, and also round things out with my favorites. So yeah, let's get right into it. In terms of stats, I read a total of 27 titles. That came out to a grand total of 5,780 pages, and that was a daily page count of, or page average of 186 pages per day. But my best actual day was 583 pages, which is a lot. I think it was very close to my biggest of the year, but I think it was a couple pages off. Anyway, my lowest page count day was a total of 3 pages. I read 3 pages and then I fell asleep. It happens. It totally happens. And now taking a look at the breakdown by title type or length, I read 1 comic, 2 graphic novels, and 5 volumes of manga for a total of 8 visual works. I read 1 collection, 2 plays, 3 nonfiction titles, 4 novellas, 4 YA novels, 2 romance novels, and 3 urban fantasies. The average page length per title was 198 pages, which is pretty normal for me. I do tend to read titles that are shorter overall, so that seems to make a lot of sense. The shortest title that I read was The Sicilian, or Love the Painter, which is in this collection of Molière. This is 5 plays, but I counted them as individual titles. So yeah, The Sicilian was 17 pages long, and the longest title was Midnight Sun by Stephenie Meyer at 658 pages long. And then I thought I'd add a couple other things here, including with the highest rated and the lowest rated. And the highest rated title was Vampire Knight Volume 11, which had a rating of 4.36. I actually did quite enjoy that particular volume and gave it 4 stars. And the lowest rated was The Sicilian with 3.16. I was so sad. That was actually, I really quite enjoyed it, but older works generally never have a great rating, and that one did have some problematic elements, I do admit to that, but it was also written in the 1660s, so it's a little different than something being written now. Anyway, the most popular title that I read in the month of August was Twilight, which I forgot to bring out. Twilight by Stephenie Meyer, which had 4.9 million ratings. Million. And the title with the least ratings, I actually have a physical copy of this. The title with the least ratings was In the Days of Cotton Wind and Sparrow by Rafi, which had a total of 2 ratings. So me and 1 other person marked this as read on Goodreads. That is pretty unusual. That is, for me, actually, occasionally, there's one time I actually had to add a book to Goodreads, but I do read a fair amount of titles that aren't as widely read, but that even surprised me. I think it's a Canadian work, yeah, Exiles Editions, and it's a Canadian work of poetry that I found at the Toronto Public Library Bookends, which is their secondhand bookstore. I actually quite enjoyed it. So let me know if you enjoyed hearing about the highest rated and most popular titles added to the mix. I thought it was kind of fun, and it wasn't too hard to do, so, I don't always talk about ratings or popularity, but I don't know, I thought it might be a bit interesting. Let me know your thoughts. Okay, taking a look at the different genres that I read this month, I read 1 work of poetry, which I just shared, 1 superhero title, 2 classics, which I'm considering the Molière plays classics. I'm not sure if that's technically correct, but 1660s, folks. 2 science fiction titles, 3 nonfiction titles, 4 urban fantasy titles, 5 dark fantasy titles. That was all Vampire Knight. And 9 romances, including, which broke down to 4 paranormal romances, 3 historical romances, 1 suspense romance, and 1 contemporary romance. And then in terms of actual format, like physical or otherwise, I read 0 audiobooks. It's not too unusual for me. I read 2 works on my Kindle, 5 on my phone, using the Scribed app, 9 on my tablet, and 11 physical. Is that true? Yes, 11 physical editions, 6 were paperback, 3 were trades, and then there were 2 hardcovers. And I was tracking this specifically this month because of one of my goals was to read less hardcovers and less on my tablet and more on my Kindle. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but I did bring down some of the titles. Like in July, I read 22 titles on my tablet, so I brought it down to 9, so that's pretty good. And then I also read 2 hardcovers as opposed to 6 in July. And I think that did make a difference. And the 2 hardcovers that I did end up reading were both new releases from this year. So that's the format in which they were available. So yeah, so I'm surprised my Kindle reading was so low, but I think it also is the titles that I finished this month. I know I read on my Kindle a lot, but I guess I didn't finish a lot on my Kindle. That's a whole other story. Okay, my ratings for the month. I rate books out of 10, so they're going to be out of 10 here. I read 2 works that I gave 9 out of 10. 4 works that I gave 8.5 out of 10, 6 that I gave 8 out of 10, 1 that I gave 7.75 out of 10, 6 that I gave 7.5 out of 10, which is my sort of average rating. Like it felt like it's good, or it's good. Yeah, more like that. And then I gave 1 title 7.25 out of 10. 6 titles got 7 out of 10, which is not great. And then 1 lone title got 6 out of 10. So that gave me an average of 7.71, which is actually up from last month, which is 7.51. I'm actually very surprised about that. I felt like this year, or this month, I read a lot more things that were enjoyable, but I didn't have as many standouts. So it's surprising to me that the average is higher. So I think maybe it's just last month I read more titles that I actively didn't enjoy or something. So, because it felt like a good month, but it didn't feel better than July, which is weird. So that's why I find stats interesting, is that they don't, sometimes they reveal things. Well, they always reveal things, but sometimes it doesn't match what I remember, so that's kind of weird. So anyway, on to series versus standalone. Out of the 27 titles that I read in August, 17 were books from series and 10 were standalones, so that's 63% series and 37% standalone. That is less series than my previous month. I'm not actually totally surprised about that, because of some of the events that I participated in. Ended up having some standalone titles where normally they would have series titles for some reason. It just happened to be that way. And that was mostly for summer fling. A lot of romances are books in series, but some of the ones I picked were not. Shocker. And okay, and within series, so out of the 17 titles that I read that were within series, I ended up starting 2 new series. 11 of the works continued series I was already reading. I felt undecided about 1 of the series that I was reading. I caught up on 1 series, yeah, and that was Invisible Kingdom. I read volume 2, Edge of Everything. I didn't DNF any series, and I ended up completing 2 series, one of which was my Twilight reread, which I was reading, and I was reading it backwards with Olivia Savannah from Olivia's Catastrophe. I'll leave a link to her video about that series up above. And but I read the whole series to Twilight, and then I read Midnight Sun, so I'm considering that a complete reread. I also finished the 20-sided Sorceress series by Bellet, which is a 10 book urban fantasy series. They are very short titles. They're like 150 to 185 pages each. So even though it's a lot of titles, it was a very fast read. I read all of them over the summer, and it was part of my stacking the series. And I gotta say, I did enjoy it, but there is a sort of like a spin-off series that's starting new, and I'm kind of like, after 10 books, I really want like a nice, complete, and it did feel complete, but I did also feel like they left something for the spinoff. So there was like one other thing that I thought would be resolved, but I imagine now will be part of the spinoff. But as I said, it didn't feel incomplete. I actually quite enjoyed where it ended up, but I was a little like, oh, and that happened to me last year too with another really long series that I read. And I'm like, once you get to like 10 books and more, I really feel like the end should be the end. So maybe it's just me. I don't know. There are also a lot of urban fantasies that do feel like they will just go on indefinitely. And there's a lot of really long running series. But I actually really do prefer series that end, that have like an overarching plot and come to a close. And I would say for the most part, 20-Sided Sorceress did. So now on to projects and challenges. So I have 37 different projects and challenges and explorations that I'm tracking this year. I don't talk about them individually, but they do come up in different videos. I'm trying to figure out a way to sort of share specifically about some of them more, but it's still sort of in formation, and I've tried a couple of things that haven't quite worked, so I'm still working on that. But they include things like my Those Books project. I'm trying to read different things from A to Z, like romance novels and mangas and stuff like that, and some of them I talk about and some of them I don't. So anyway, just trust me, there's 37 of them. And I'm trying to figure out a way to incorporate sharing a bit more about them. But anyway, out of the 27 different titles that I read this month, 16 of them worked for different projects and challenges. And with those 16 titles, I actually met 30 different goals. So 30 challenges were complete with those 16 titles. How this can happen is that one title can meet multiple criteria. For example, if I read a romance novel that fills in a new letter, but it's also by one of the authors, then I want to read all of their works. And that actually did happen this month because I read something by Michelle Willingham. It counts for both the title of the work as well as that I want to read from that author. So it can work if it matches like multiple challenges I'm doing. It counts for sort of like more points in a way. So I got 30 points, shall we say, with those 16 titles, which got me 4.2% closer to my overall goal. And the overall goal is a total of 713 different points or categories or not challenges, but those 37 challenges, if I count up how many books I allotted to each of those challenges, is 713. I don't actually imagine reading that many. It's just that some of the challenges have a finite number of titles that I need to read. So, and some of them have, like, I only want to read like 5 this year, and some I just put the whole thing. So it's a bit weird. It's a bit flux. It's kind of, for me, it's actually kind of nice to have a goal or a challenge that's so large that doesn't feel oppressive to me. Often I would feel like really like I have to meet it. There's no way I can meet that. 713, there's no way. Even with getting 30 a month, I would only, if that was my average, I would only get 360 for the year, which is almost half. So it's weird. I don't know why it makes me feel, I like having it being so overly ambitious that there's no way I can finish it. For some reason, frees up the energy on it. It's weird. That's so not usually a Shannon way, but because it's feels good and is working, I am not changing it. Now we can look to some of the month-specific challenges that I'm working on. So every month I try and finish half of the books that are on my currently reading on Goodreads when one month switches to the other. And when August began, I had 24 titles on my currently reading, which is getting a bit high. So my goal was to read 12, but I only read 5. So I fell short on that goal. For my Stacking the Series challenge, I wanted to read 8 titles this month, and I read 3, all from the 20-Sided Sorceress series. So I fell short of my goal, but I did finish a series. So that is, something. And then I participated in 2 readathons this month. The first up, I participated in the Summer Fling, which was created and hosted by Sarah from the Bookish Knitter. She changed her handle name, and she was steeped in books, but now she's the Bookish Knitter. I think, is it the Knitter Bookish? No, the Bookish Knitter. So I and had a whole summer fling, had lots and lots of co-hosts of romance booktubers. It was so much fun. I really, really had a good time. I did read 9 titles for the summer fling, and I read a couple that I didn't finish before the end of the month, because that happens. So overall, I read 1 short story, 2 category romances, 3 novellas, 3 paranormal romances, which were the Twilight, New Moon, and Midnight Sun. I didn't talk about those much when I was talking about the summer fling, but I was like, these are romances, so they totally count. So yeah, and so I mostly read category romance and novellas, and that was intentional. My goal within the goal for the readathon was to read romance every day. So when I picked my TBR, I specifically chose shorter titles so that I would feel like the yay of finishing something. And so I just started with a short story, and then a novella, and then another novella, and then eventually 2 category romances, which were around the 250 page mark. And so I was really, really happy with that. And then I burned through Twilight, New Moon, and Midnight Sun, which were all Midnight Sun was over 600 pages, which it really did not need to be. So anyway, I met my goal to read romance every day, which was so much fun. And then I also had a lot of fun participating in the scavenger hunt that Elizabeth from Lizzie Faye Loves Books put together. I included a title on Instagram every day. The only one I didn't hit was wedding, because it was a bonus challenge and I didn't have something for it. And then I ended up forgetting to use it. And I'm like, oh no. So I did 31 of the 32. So the only one I didn't do was the bonus. It was a lot of fun to both work with titles that I had read as well as research other titles. And I think it ended up being maybe about 30, like 1/3 I had read and 2/3 I hadn't read. And as the month went on, it ended up being more and more I hadn't read, because I only had so many recommendations. Even though I do read a fair amount of romance, I didn't have quite as many recommendations, but I had lots of fun researching new titles to enjoy as well. So the scavenger hunt was great. The second readathon that I participated in was the history challenge, which was the last 2 weeks of the month. I ended up finishing 1 of the 3 books that I put on my TBR. I feel like I just did a horrible job at the history challenge. I didn't participate very actively. I watched a fair amount of TBRs and I found some new people, which was awesome, especially to find new people that talk about nonfiction. But I just wasn't that participatory. I was very invested in the summer fling, and I think that just for me lets me know, and I knew this was risky going in, is that doing more than 1 readathon at a time was too hard. It's too hard. It's too much of a split focus for me. So 1 at a time, and I don't even usually do month-long readathons, so that was even a challenge, but I managed it for summer fling. But I'm really excited about the history challenge, and it did get me more thinking about history in general, and I actually had a really great conversation with my dad. So even just for that, it was totally worth it. It was totally worth it. So yeah. And then looking back at my TBR as a whole, I had a total of 12 books on my TBR that weren't part of the summer fling. And from those 12 books, I read 4 of them and I started an additional 5. So 9 out of the 12 got some movement. That's actually that's kind of like okay. That's a little lower than normal for me. And then for the summer fling, I finished 6 titles and a short story within a collection. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I read one of the works in Cottage of Pumpkin and Vine, and then also the 3 Twilight, which weren't on my TBR. But just as I said, I read romance every day, and that was the win. The other big challenge I had for the month, or thing that I was tracking the month, was I was trying to read less hardcovers and less on my tablet because my hands have been hurting, and so I was trying to determine whether or not making a change in that way, reading heavier text, because hardcovers can be really heavy. They're harder to hold, and I really do like paperbacks a lot. But, sometimes you have something in the format in which you have it in. And both of the hardcovers I read this month were 2020 releases. So I think it ended up going okay. I think reading less hardcovers was a good choice. I think that definitely made a difference. And reading less on my tablet, I'm not totally convinced. My tablet is pretty heavy. Like it's not too bad, but it's also in a case. But I read like 60 to 75% generally from my tablet. So what I I did with that was I tried to read on my phone anything that I would read as an ebook on Scribd. And it lasted about half the month, I think, and then I started to turn towards reading paperbacks a little bit more. I didn't love reading on my phone just because you spend a lot of time looking at your phone, so it was like more time looking at my phone. So I didn't love that. It worked best for novellas and anything with short chapters, but if it was a book that had 25-page chapters, like in like regular format, it would look like you had 60 pages for a chapter because it changes the page count for your, does it change it? I don't know. It just made it feel like I was never going to get through the chapter. That's the truth. So as the month went on, I noticed myself using it less and less. So that wasn't a great fix, and I do read a lot of ebooks from Scribd, so I'm still working with that. Again, I was very surprised that I didn't read as much as I thought I would from my Kindle. So that's really strange. As a Canadian, just FYI, I can't read library books on my Kindle. I can only read them on my tablet because you have to use the Overdrive app. So that's one other thing as well, is if I was reading something from the library, I would also have to read it on my phone, although mostly I read books from Scribd. So overall, I feel like the experiment went well. It gave me some good information. Are there other things that I can do to help my hands? Yes. But does making these changes help? Yes. So I think it's a good reminder, and it's a good reminder especially to reduce the amount of hardcovers I'm reading, at least at the same time, like maybe only one at a time, or one and then give myself a week off or something like that. But there are some works that's the format that I have them in. So, and I'm not much of an audiobook reader for fiction, so I know that would be a really great option, except for the fact that I don't retain the story at all, so not such a great option. So learning, and that was part of the experiment. And so I think novellas on my phone is okay, less hardcovers than normal, but this and paperbacks, I actually really love paperbacks. I just find that they're not necessarily the most, there definitely don't seem to be what am I trying to say? I feel like most books now end up being in trade paperback, and I find those pretty, unwieldy. Not always, but just they're big. They're big and they're heavier, and I have no problem with paperbacks, but I just feel like mass market paperbacks, and I feel like they're not a much loved format. But thankfully with Amazon or wherever you're shopping, usually you can tell which format it is. So maybe that just means that I will opt for more paperbacks when I'm bringing new books in, which of course I probably shouldn't do because I have so many unread books. That's a whole other ball of wax. Okay, so I learned a fair amount, and I think I have some good information going forward. I did track what I was reading each day, and I did track my pain each day, so to see the correlation between that, and it was interesting. So yeah. So on to the favorites. Okay, first up, I do have an honorable mention, and that is New Moon. It was a reread for me. I don't know if I include rereads as part of my favorites, but it is a favorite. I do feel complicated about it now because the series feels like they're, reading it again, definitely can see, the problematic elements, and so, but it is still my favorite of the series. So that's why it's an honorable mention. I wasn't even sure how to rate it on my spreadsheet. Do I rate it how I read and feel about it now? Do I leave it as its rating as before? I don't even know. I don't remember what I did. I might have just left it blank. I don't know. I don't remember. Okay, so the actual, and then I think do I have 6? I usually have 6. I usually have whatever, top 5 plus 1. Yeah, I think so. So going first up, we have Michelle Willingham's The Vikings Redemption. This is the 0.5 or the prequel short story for the Sons of Sigurd series, which is a historical romance series centered on Vikings. Michelle Willingham also wrote the first book in that series. It's a 5-book historical romance Viking series, and all of the books are coming out this year, and all of the books are by different authors, but this short story and the first one are both by Michelle Willingham. I really enjoyed this one. It featured a woman who was learning how to fight, and she befriends someone from the sort of who's visiting the area, who has like some vengeance in mind, and they meet each other and train each other, and it's a romance, so you know where we're going here. And yeah, so that was my sixth favorite. Does that how it work? My fifth favorite was A Song Below Water by Bethany C. Morrow. This is an urban fantasy story set in Portland. Was it Portland? And I read this with Izzy, Punk Rock Girl PA, and Portland, Oregon, and it features a siren, as well as other urban fantasy and folklore entities. That's not a good word. Beings, people, and some that I had never heard of, so that was always exciting. This is quite serious though, and it does deal with contemporary issues, including Black Lives Matter and protests and police, so I wasn't expecting that, so it was a bit of a more challenging read in terms of emotionally, and it also was, for me, it was also quite a slow read. It's under 300 pages, but it took me dedicated reading time, which I was surprised at. It didn't quite, it took me a while to get the hang of the story, I think it was for me, I've read a lot of urban fantasy, so I thought it would be, like, I would just really connect right away, but because it had so many contemporary issues, it took me a while to sort of like bring that together. So expectations, folks. And also I really enjoyed in this one the two protagonists are they're not sisters, but they have a sistership or a sisterhood. I don't remember what the right term is. And I felt like that was really Black sisterhood is what the author calls it, and I thought that was really special, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the story. So it was my fifth favorite. My fourth favorite was The Sicilian by Molière, the worst rated, the lowest rated, not worst, let's say lowest rated from the month, according to Goodreads. I really enjoyed it. It was a comedy about a guy who falls in love with the girl across the way, and he goes to a lot of different ends and means to try and find out if she feels the same. It is problematic, I will say that. There are depictions of people groups that is not, what we would do now, it also, the woman in it is a slave. So it is not PC, but again, it is from the 1660s, and I can't remember, it might be a farce, but it is a comedy. It's supposed to be taken as comedy. So that was my fourth favorite, I think. Is that where we're at? My next favorite, my third favorite, I can't remember. Next time I'm numbering these. And this will be no surprise if people watch my Friday reads from August, and that would be The Illustrated Guide to Viking Martial Arts by Anthony Cummins, and this is the graphic designer for this was Jake Kane. This is exactly what it sounds. Someone took the sagas, translated the fighting into actual actions, physical actions, and then created an illustrated guide and separated out to sword, spear, shield, unarmed, horse combat, group combat. I loved it so much. Okay, next up, also nonfiction, The Penguin Guide to Punctuation by R.L. Trask. Who knew that punctuation would be my second most favorite of the month, but I loved it. This was actually a carryover from July. I started it during Grinchathon, and one of the things I actually really enjoyed and appreciated about punctuation is that it's all about clarity. It's about making things more understandable for the reader. I have a huge, strong space in my heart for clarity. I feel very, very strongly about it, and so it's like literally one of my values. So punctuation came in at number 2. And then number 1 was actually back to Molière, The Misanthrope. So the title work from this collection, which is funny because I read it so long ago, and now I've read all 5. I'm having just like a slight trying to remember exactly which one was The Misanthrope and what it was about, but it was the highest rated on my spreadsheet, so it wins. It is number 1. I can't remember, these might have been rated the same, but then I picked Molière. So they might have. No, I think Molière edged out. No, Molière edged out. It was the top dog. So There you go. Those are my favorites. That is how August went. It was quite of a whirlwind month. I had so much fun during the summer fling. It was just a blast. And I'm actually really, last year, in the past couple of years, it has been a 3-month or summer-long readathon. And I think doing it in August was perfect. It was enough for it to feel like there was, like, I don't know, I just felt so invested in the readathon, and I had so much fun, and it just felt like the perfect length. So that was really wonderful. So thanks again to Sarah for creating it, and to all of the wonderful co-hosts. So let me know how your August went. Let me know what was your favorite book in the month of August, and I will be back very soon with another video. Thanks for watching.